Welcome. Welcome to the webinar, TourismStrong, Solutions for Sustainable Travel Recovery. My name is Graham Harper, and I am the Director of Sustainability for the Pacific Asia Travel Association, PATA. At PATA, sustainability, our vision, is to protect our very reason for being. And that is the very unique cultures, the habitats, the cultural assets of the destinations that make travel and tourism so special. So at PATA for sustainability, we work for our membership and for our strategic partners to exponentially impact the UN Sustainable Development Goals within the Asia-Pacific travel industry. Now, to do this, we have a very strategic focus, and that's on destinations. Because tourism can never truly be sustainable until the destinations are. Destinations that are sustainable provide a better standard of living for the people that are there. They also provide better experiences for the visitors. And so it's for that reason that we are looking at communities and we're looking at what innovations are required. And that is very much at the heart of what today's conversation is going to be about. How can we make tourism strong? And what are those solutions for a sustainable travel recovery? Now, just a bit of housekeeping and a note for everyone. Throughout the webinar today, we're going to have a chance to ask questions. And in your toolbar of the Zoom window, you will see the Q&A. Please hit the Q&A and type in your questions. We will try to get to that as we're going through the conversation of the webinar today. Now, it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce our guest, Rob Holmes. Rob is the founder and chief strategist of GLP Films. Rob founded this back in 2008 with the simple goal of building a unique and successful production marketing company that's committed to authentic storytelling on important global issues. Now, one of the things about GLP that has always really stood out for me is they have a very direct and strong vision: sustainability plus storytelling. And that creates their collective vision, our collective vision, on what the future of travel really is. Now, Rob is an award-winning photographer, and he has worked, traveled, studied, been all over the globe, many, many different countries. He loves the outdoors, he loves working with communities, he loves travel, and he loves to tell stories. And so it's with this that's a great pleasure to welcome Rob. And Rob, thank you very much for joining us today. And if possible, would you mind to give a little bit more of an introduction, both about yourself and GLP Films, please?
Sure, thanks, Graham. That was actually, you stole a lot of my thunder there with the introduction. But yeah, I'm Rob Holmes, and I'm based in Kennebunk, Maine, so the eastern seaboard of the US, just along the Canadian border, just about a 4-hour drive from New York City. And I've got 2 little kids, and just really enjoy being up here in Maine. I'm from the northeastern region of the US, originally from Boston. And but my background is, as Graham said, I was a photographer, and I'll actually bring this up later. That's how I got into the industry. I've got an undergraduate degree in wildlife management, so I really have a real appreciation and understanding for wildlife issues. And then my foray into tourism, I mean, it's pretty much been most of my career. And I'll touch on some of the experiences I've had just over the years and how it's impacted GLP and then our storytelling work. But for GLP, we've been around since 2008, which is amazing to think. 12 years. My, how time flies. But I will say...
You started in one global financial crisis, and now you find yourself smack dab in the middle of another.
Good timing, I guess.
Yeah.
But for those that might know, GLP actually stands for Green Living Project. So at our core, and when we started as a team, and our original team is still together to this day, green or sustainability was at the core of what we do, and it still remains today. So on the business side, I'll say specifically, you know, we're the leading content marketing agency dedicated to sustainable tourism. And as Graham mentioned, while we are a full service agency, content strategy, branding, distribution, stakeholder development, you know, all the services we provide our brands or our partners, at the core of what we do is storytelling. And that comes from my background. It comes from, I think, our team's philosophy of just the power of influence. And we'll talk about this later in the webinar, just about the power of content, the power of stories, and how it can really make a positive impact.
Right. Well, you know, Rob, a lot of what we want to talk about today is actually hinged on that work that GLP has been doing. And since the COVID pandemic has broken out, you've been working very, very hard on a new series, the TourismStrong, which is, you know, the title of our talk today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about TourismStrong and how that came about?
Yeah, well, I will say, you know, we were filming actually in Thailand in February. And when we left, we had to actually fly through Korea, going back to the US. But when we left Bangkok, I just specifically remember at that moment in February, there were 35 cases of COVID-19. Yeah. And, you know, it really puts things in perspective. We had heard about it. It was this, you know, big question mark. A lot of us didn't know, but when we flew back, we were very conscious. And I remember just being in the Seoul airport and just everyone wearing a mask. And again, just, you know, we were living in the moment. And then we came back, and actually in March, ironically, we were filming a luxury travel event down in California in the US. And I remember flying and never seen cleaner planes in my entire life. So right there, again, just that very early days of, okay, we weren't aware of the severity of it. We had no idea how long it would continue, but just those moments are very fresh in my mind. But once the pandemic hit, you know, around March 12th, at least in the US, for us personally, a school shut down, businesses shut down, offices shut down. You know, our first reaction as a team was, what can we do to help? You know, we started in the tourism industry. We're absolutely dedicated to the tourism industry. We weren't going to go anywhere, but we just thought internally, you know, what can we do? And I think just in talking with the team, we said, well, we've got this awesome global network of film partners that we've worked with over the past 12 years, all over the world, Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe, North America. And, you know, we just did it the old fashioned way. I just reached out. I reached out to almost all of our film partners, checked in, see what they were doing, see how they were handling it. And at the end, we knew TourismStrong was going to be a really important initiative because at the core, it was about helping the industry. But we didn't know the content and the stories. It was all live, essentially. So we didn't know exactly what the final product would be. But I think at the end of the day, you know, our selection process was very specifically on the best stories possible, but we also wanted diversity. We wanted geographic diversity. We wanted gender diversity, you know, male, female. We also wanted just diversity in the topics and also diversity in the organizations. So destinations to operators to hotels and nonprofits. So we really wanted the mixture because we felt at the end, the more diversity, the more variety in the stories, the better it's going to engage, because ultimately we wanted to make a positive impact and help people. Again, the goal of TourismStrong was to bring people up. I mean, such a traumatic period, and the videos are on our website. You can see all of them. There's just so much diversity and so many different stories that it was,
Well,
we felt it was.
even within, you know, the title, just Tourism Strong, I mean, that's a very, very good indication of, you know, sort of the direction that it's going. And, you know, you're talking about the process, and you've been talking about sort of that going through and trying to select. Now, you did over 23 different videos. I mean, that's a wide range. And I mean, I get, you know, I heard diversity, 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 which makes sense because our globe is very, very diverse. But I want to dig down a little bit more into that process because, you know, let's face it, I mean, I'm at my home, you're at your home. I mean, our whole world, our whole way of working has changed. How did you go about doing a global campaign to promote tourism from working at home? I mean, how does that work? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, it put reality of sort of the work we do. I mean, the work we do when we film, if it's in Chile, if it's in Thailand, if it's in Kosovo or, you know, Europe, it's all about connecting with people. And in this case, again, a good handful of the organizations we worked with to tell their story, we just reached out direct. And so we went through all the social channels. I had majority of them, I had their own emails, so I could just reach out. And we, you know, again, we really tried to qualify, but it was outreach. I mean, at the end of the day, you'll see in a lot of the videos, it's dark in my background like it is right now. It's nighttime. So I was doing early morning interviews, late evening interviews. You know, we wanted also to have some consistency and roll them out. So between the editing, the transcripts, because, you know, they were not all in English. I mean, we had a variety of different, and even the Thailand stories that we did were in Thai, you know, because that's where people felt most comfortable. So we really basically took our field filming production process and put it basically all through Zoom or Skype or whatever the format was that we were going to talk to people. So it was a big change for us internally, but at the end, it's about connecting with people and hearing their story. And then the editing and putting the story together, well, that's what we typically do. So that was relatively easy.
Let me just carrying on with this just for a short while longer, because, you know, you have your team, but your team is also diverse and in diverse locations. You know, do you want to just kind of mention this, the remote working of your team and how that fits together?
Yeah, we've actually always been remote. And I remember when we started back in 2008, you know, almost hiding the fact that, you know, Laura, who heads up our marketing, is in San Diego. And, you know, Matt, who heads up our editing team, is in Colorado, and I'm in Maine, you know. So yeah. In the very beginning, it wasn't something we promoted. But, you know, at the end of the day, it came out over time, just, hey, if you want to talk to, we basically cover the entire US market because we're in all the different time zones. So it was something that, yeah, we didn't, I mean, you know, you get to know someone, it becomes a fluid conversation. At the end of the day, they don't care where you are. But it is ironic now that everyone's jumping into working from home when our team's been virtual since day one.
Yeah, and I think that's actually one of the good outcomes of this current situation is that we've actually learned that there can be an awful lot done when working remotely. But let's go back to TourismStrong, because, you know, there would have been a number of challenges with this, and it wouldn't have always been a sort of easy process to be able to develop. What perhaps were some of those challenges or difficulties that you would have come across?
Well, let's be honest, this is a global tragedy like we've never experienced. Yeah. So I think we were all hit, and that was a consistent storyline in TourismStrong, was just the hard impact, the devastation that it caused.
Mm.
And you know, that was very clear when talking to an organization in Uganda where their funding was literally running out that following week, you know, to organizations that had to, you know, basically, you know, that were shutting down, that were closed for business, 35 years in business, and suddenly they had to shut their doors. Not permanently, but they had to lay everyone off. So, but I think, you know, some of the key themes that come out of all this, I think the most powerful one, again, GLP being a small business, is it immediately forced all the organizations to get back to the basics. And the phrase I like to use, because it actually came from the first story we produced on Rios Tropicales out of Costa Rica, Rafa Gallo, was we're all startups again. You know, it really forced anyone working in the tourism industry, you know, your revenue has disappeared. Your staff has been reduced in some capacity. You have, you know, and suddenly you have to change because you have no income coming in to supply the demands that you need internally. And so it really, I think across the board with everyone was, we got to get back to the basics. And that's one of the takeaways I saw with TourismStrong, that we saw with TourismStrong, is just the power and the resiliency of the tourism industry, and in particular, the resiliency of the sustainable tourism industry. You know, very passionate, very dedicated, so committed. And those, in my opinion, those are and we'll talk about this later, those are the organizations and the companies that are going to rise above this and be stronger. You know,
they're going to come out and they're going to be strong at the end. But I'm actually very interested by the phrase you used, we're all startups again. Can you like maybe dig down a little bit more on that? You know, what does it mean? Because there are a lot of tourism companies that have been around for a long time and in a sense are almost waiting it out.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the essence of why you started your organization, your business. You did it we're in the travel industry. You did it because you love travel. Mm-hmm. And so we're all startups again basically gets you back to, you have no money, you have no resources to market, your product is at standstill. So basically, like I said earlier, your revenue is gone, your support team, you know, it's basically down to the CEO, founder, chief person by themselves in their home trying to figure out this business and going out and doing whatever they can on a shoestring budget. And that's the startup mentality. You do whatever it takes. You're at home. You need the support of friends and family to get from point A to point B. And that's, I think, the part that was just wonderful to see, is it was the passion and the commitment that people had that was going to make their company survive, because they were back to the basics of why they started it. And the second video I'll show in the webinar talks specifically about that, about a couple getting back to their roots. But looking at some of the other takeaways, just quickly, Graham, you know, the community side, so important. If it's staffing or the nearby surrounding community that are reliant on jobs, income, you know, businesses, hotels would be making baskets of food and be giving it out, literally handing it out as a donation to the local community, just to help them have some food, because people couldn't travel. You couldn't go to the market and everything was on lockdown. I think also just how businesses have pivoted.
And sorry, I'm just gonna jump in here, but were you finding that sort of, was it in specific areas or was it globally that, you know, people were showing this resiliency, were showing this sense of community, you know, this sense of reaching out and doing more with others?
It's global. It was global, hands down. I mean, everywhere, Latin America, Africa, Asia. I mean, because we're all in this together. Like I said earlier, this has been like no other tragedy. We've all been impacted. Doesn't matter who you are or where you are. And that resiliency and seeing the importance of community. And again, if the staffing is your community, you know, in Chiapas, Mexico, a coffee plantation, literally the walls are shut and no one, 300 people are in the local community and they can't go back to their families in town because, you know, infections could could cross borders. So they literally had to lock people, not quarantine, but just keep people from leaving. And then same thing in Uganda, all these rangers, they couldn't go back to their families. They had to stay there. So it was that seeing the importance of community. And I know for myself, I experienced that home too, and just seeing the importance of your immediate family and people you could connect with. But the change too, and then I think also the other thing I'd like to point out is just seeing the importance of self-sufficiency. If you look at, growing your own food, having your own animals on location so you could provide some of the basic necessities for your staff, for the community, just again, sort of getting back to the roots of growing your own food and raising your own food. That's self-sufficiency mentality. So you're not dependent on our truckloads or food coming in, that you can manage on your own, because food became such an important staple because people couldn't travel, and that being locked down. But I will say overall, at the end, the biggest takeaway for us was just this overwhelming positivity just across the industry. And I think that's just that passion, determination, and love that we all have, not just for sustainable tourism, but just for the travel industry.
Yeah, and I think with that, I'll jump in, and because I think your first video is going to really give a good example of that self-sufficiency, of that resiliency, and of just that sense of community. Do you want to give a very quick introduction to the video and then perhaps show it to us, please?
Yeah. Let me pull up this first slide here.
While Rob is getting this, I'll just remind all of the participants today that if you want, you can post a question on the Q&A button on your Zoom panel. Please, Rob. Yeah, so this first story, again, I wanted to show it. This is a sort of a world premiere. It hasn't been shown anywhere. Very excited to be coming out with some new content in this market. And it really embraces, I think, the two topics we're going to be talking about today: sustainability and storytelling. The location is in Southern Thailand. So we're down just north of Phuket for about 3 days. Took a half day to get there, but once we were there, about 3 days of filming overall. It's a small local community, and you'll see the themes coming out of this story, community, culture, nature, and sustainability ultimately. And we can talk about it afterwards. But the ironic thing with this new film, it's really embracing community-based tourism. And on September 27th, which is World Tourism Day, the theme is rural tourism. So it's just a very timely story that's looking at a really big movement in the tourism sector, in the sustainable tourism sector of rural tourism, and in this case, community-based tourism. So with no further ado, let's show this first video.
คือเรื่องการอนุรักษ์เราอนุรักษ์มาตั้งแต่รุ่นบรรพบุรุษครับเพราะว่ามันเป็นเหมือนกับซุปเปอร์มาร์เก็ตของชาวบ้านพวกกุ้งหอยปูปลาคือสามารถเจอในป่าชายเลนได้ทั้งหมดเลยป่าชายเลนเปรียบเสมือนเขาเรียกลงมาฝั่งน้ำเสียนี่คือความสำคัญเปรียบเสมือนลักษณะของตัวสะพานตัวคำว่าเชื่อมโยงระบบนี้ก็สำคัญคือการอนุรักษ์ไม่ใช่ว่าไม่ให้ใช้ประโยชน์เลยแต่คือให้ใช้ยังไงให้ยั่งยืนเพื่อจะได้ใช้ถึงรุ่นลูกรุ่นหลานต่อไปในอนาคตเนื่องจากป่าชายเลนชุมชนที่อยู่โดยรอบก็จะเกิดอาชีพหลากหลายมากนะครับไม่ว่าจะเป็นคนขับเรือหรือคนตกปูคืออาชีพมันมีหลากหลายมากถ้าเราเข้าใจ ทรัพยากรแล้วเราก็จัดการได้ว่าถ้ามีป่าที่สมบูรณ์ก็จะมีนักท่องเที่ยวที่มาชมมาเที่ยวตามวิถีธรรมชาติมากขึ้น
You really feel how the people live and you get to know the people who live in this country and who makes this country special.
แล้วก็บรรยากาศของน้ำทะเลที่ข้างนอกมันเขียวใสแล้วก็หมู่เกาะที่ยังเป็นธรรมชาติอยู่คือเมื่อได้ขับเรือไปเจอก็อยากแชร์ประสบการณ์จากที่เราได้ไปเจอแล้วสวย
I really enjoyed like getting into the handicrafts and to be able to do it myself.
เวลามีแขกมาพักที่โฮมสเตย์สนุกแล้วก็ทำให้บ้านคึกคืนขึ้นเหมือนกับมีเพื่อนมีญาติมาเยี่ยมเราจะไม่คิดว่าเป็นนักท่องเที่ยวมาคือทุกคนในครอบครัวต้อนรับด้วยใจจริงๆครับมุสลิม 99% ไทยพุทธ 1% เราก็สามารถอยู่ร่วมกันได้โดยมีความสุขไม่มีปัญหาขัดแย้งเรื่องศาสนาเพราะว่าศาสนาเป็นเรื่องการนับถือทางจิตใจเพราะฉะนั้นเรื่องศาสนาจะไม่มีปัญหากันเราสามารถอยู่รวมกันอย่างมีความสุขประเทศไทยก็สามารถตอบสนองได้ไม่ว่าจะเป็นเรื่องของความเป็นธรรมชาติเรื่องของมิตรภาพที่คนไทยให้ไปรวมถึงความปลอดภัยที่ประเทศไทยกำลังพัฒนาดูแลนักท่องเที่ยวคนที่มาเที่ยวอยากได้ไปเจอไปเห็นเหมือนกับเรากับที่เราเห็นคืออยากจะให้สัมผัสธรรมชาติที่ยังดิบๆอยู่ไม่ได้มีการปรุงแต่งอะไรมากมายจะได้สัมผัสธรรมชาติจริงๆ
Thank you, Rob. You could beat me to that. I was trying to get there.
That's all right. That's all right. It's a team effort.
Yeah, well, you certainly got the sustainability, the self-sufficiency, and the community coming through on that. Any other sort of comments or insights from working with this community?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, just again, I've seen obviously the video, the story many times, but Bang Hem, who is he was basically the village chief.
Yeah.
Just warms my heart. You know, he's a great guy. He just went out of his way to work with us, to be with us, to share his story, you know, and he's not a outspoken person. He's a man of few words. And, you know, here you have I didn't speak his local dialect, and you know, I mean, there was, but just spending time with him and his family was just awesome. And I think one of the things I'll jump to because it'll show in the next two videos is, you know, the impact of the COVID-19, the pandemic, and in this case, in this community, they weren't impacted. They're doing fine. You know, when we reached out to the local companies that we had worked with and they reached out to Bang Hem, he's like, yeah, we're fine. We're having a big seafood dinner tonight. And, you know, it was like nothing had really changed, you know, and they're just hanging out doing what they were doing. And that, you know, for us that's a great example of the power of sustainable tourism. And this is community-based tourism. So when they came in and developed tourism, they didn't disrupt the local economy. You know, they complemented it. And so the income coming in through tourism, you know, it provided educational resources, allowing kids to go to schools and whatnot. But once the pandemic hit, they were in lockdown. They just shut down but continued to do what they needed to do. And so it's just a great example and something we're so proud to tell of how if tourism is done right, and it's thoughtfully done and really interwoven within the fabric of an existing economy, it can have such far-reaching benefits. And in this case, where you have a lockdown of the tourism industry, they're doing okay. Yes, sure,
Yeah.
they don't have the supplemental income, but they're overall they're good.
Yeah, and that's, you know, once again, reinforcing that self-sufficiency, that resiliency, and, you know, even going back to your title, the Tourism Strong. And I think that's actually a lesson that a lot of maybe perhaps the more mainstream tourism destinations have found, is to not be too dependent on specific markets, because once those markets end, there can be very, very severe implications. Rob, I'd like to switch a little bit to more of the sustainability focus, and, you know, maybe some of the lessons that have come out about sustainability. A little while ago, you wrote a very powerful article that, you know, was published on LinkedIn and has been circulated around a little bit. You know, Pato was circulating it, and it's also on your website. But a lot of these insights from being able to do so many of these different interviews and all of the different videos through Tourism Strong, some insights on sustainability and what that's going to mean for the future of our industry. Can I get your insights on that article and on sustainability and the future of tourism?
Yeah, the article is titled "Sustainable Future for a COVID-19 World," and, you know, it's still, if not that, you know, very relevant even here. Again, yes. COVID-19 continues today. You know, I think for myself, having grown up in the tourism industry and having grown up in the sustainability sector, you know, if it's looking at wildlife or looking at the tourism industry directly. You know, I think the frustration I had going back a couple decades was, you know, sustainability was really seen as a niche market, very niche. You know, it started out sort of the tree huggers, you know, then eco-radical folks, and, you know, and then slowly into the 90s, you saw things changing and larger organizations embracing sustainability because it saved them money. You know, it was a cost-saving measure, and so we've seen a big transformation. And then you see sustainability just over the last, say, 5, maybe 10 years. You know, it's a CSR initiative. So every company would develop a corporate social responsibility initiative to help local communities or to give back. But again, it was always on a niche. It was always off to the side, a separate sector. And I think what COVID-19 taught our team, and I think more importantly taught the tourism industry, is that, and I think a lot of us personally, you know, for myself and just appreciating the outdoors and nature, being locked down with my kids in Maine at home, you know, I would take them out at 4 o'clock every day just to get outside, and we'd hike the trails and go to the ocean and just experience and enjoy, and most importantly, appreciate nature. So I think the pivot that tourism is making, and I think needs to make, and I think will make, is making sustainability part of doing business. That is going to be a fundamental pillar. And that's what this article is really talking about, that, you know, it's top down. It's having a strategic plan that's sustainability is part of it. It's not a line item that gets cut. It's a part of the business plan. It's part of the model. And you're seeing this with a lot of very innovative organizations, you know, B Corps that are really looking at, you know, a different kind of business model, but also empowering the team. You know, everyone's involved. You know, again, it's not just a separate part of the company. It's part of the fabric, you know, almost like having someone on the board or someone in the executive team that's coming from sustainability, and that's happening. And also, you know, a common thing that we've seen from GLP's standpoint, you know, when we're promoting content, you know, we talk to destinations or brands, and I think in the past, before over-tourism kicked in, you know, it was really a volume game. Can we hit 30 million tourists a year? Can we hit 40 million? And that's, you know, again, no discredit to them. That was where the market was. It was all about volume. And then we started to see the last 2 or 3 years, over tourism, it became common everywhere, every continent, every major tourist destination. And we all know the stories. So I think now with the pandemic, it's done a big shift, you know, and I think for us as a team and as an organization that's really looking at sustainable tourism as a important part of tourism. I think this article really just talks about it's a fundamental part of doing business. You want to do business in tourism, it has to be part of your plan. And that's where I think also my direct comments on a TourismStrong and the pandemic is in a certain way, while COVID-19 caused a lot of problems just in the private sector, the government sector, and just local families and communities, I do think it was good in the sense that it really, the people that are fully committed, fully vested, and fully supporting tourism or sustainable tourism, those are the companies that are going to survive all this. They're the ones that are just going to have to pivot, transition, diversify their business. But it's that passion from the heart, from the soul, from the team that is going to allow them to really rise above this and figure out how to make it all work. And I think the general consensus, if you look at a lot of those organizations that are doing well, they are or have already really embraced sustainability.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, I mean, in the lead up to this discussion, you and I had a lot of other discussions. And two of the words that were constantly coming out in our conversations were pivot and innovate. And just your mention of the B Corp and the different companies that are going through and doing that, I've actually really noticed the real innovation coming from those companies that have made that commitment. And, one of the Pata partners, which, has become B Corp, has really been pushing the whole idea of, for example, with carbon offsetting, to change it from the idea of an offset to an inset. And that inset where it's actually being integrated within the supply chain of the core business. And I think that that's, another good example of how things change. But I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but I mean, all of this is coming down to, sustainability being a core part of the business. And I think you have some other examples of, TourismStrong businesses that have done that pivot, have done that innovation so that they can meet the new consumers' demands. And perhaps you can give us a bit of introduction to the next video.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd add on to, Graham, about that article was also just great dialogue and communication on it. People were posting comments of, what about climate change? What about regeneration? What about purpose-driven businesses? What about the sustainability, the sustainable development goals?
Yeah.
So and again, a big part of this future of tourism and, looking at sustainable tourism moving forward is collaborating. And it's that kind of dialogue, being open, and just talking and communicating. And that was a big takeaway, again, from TourismStrong, is the communication and collaboration between, like I said earlier, local communities, staff, et cetera. But on the notion of another great story and looking toward the future, let me put up the slide for the next story here.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I'll just make the comment about, in 2020, it's gotten a little bit overshadowed because of everything that's happened with COVID. But Pata's theme for 2020 was partnerships. And that's the communication, that's the collaboration that is really, really necessary. And that's the SDG goal number 17. And we need to remember that. Sorry, with that little aside, we're now ready to go into the next video. Rob, please.
Yeah, no, this is a story very near and dear to me personally. I know the subjects here very well. I've taken my daughter down to Ecuador and stayed with them. They're longtime friends, Jorge and Maria Jose. But they're based in in Quito, Ecuador. Tierra Volcan is a local operator, but also a hacienda. So they're also doing in accommodations. But their story and their theme overall, looking at the adventure travel industry, which is a big part for them. Nature, of course, the beauty of the Cotopaxi area, the volcano, sort of Andean cloud forests of Ecuador. And you'll see with their story, sustainability you know, and where their roots come from, and where they're really driven moving forward. So
Rob, sorry, just before you show this video, we did have one question come in, and it fits in right now. These different examples that you're showing, all of these communities and organizations that you've connected with, how do you make these connections? How do you get in touch with them?
I honestly think it's a matter of being in the travel industry for 12 years and being a good communicator, and just, I don't want to say networking, but just talking to a lot of people. And, you know, we've gotten a lot of attention and recognition for our award-winning films that we've won time and time again in food and adventure and culture, sustainability, and that gets awareness. But I think just going to a lot of events, you know, the old-fashioned day when we used to go to trade shows, pre-COVID. But I think it's honestly, and just our focus and commitment to not just the tourism industry, but making an impact. You know, we're a mission-based team, and I think when you're mission-based and you connect up with other like-minded souls, there's a wonderful community within the tourism industry. The tourism industry is a global economic force nowadays, and it's been shown clearly, especially after COVID-19. But there's a wonderful community though around it, and again, we're solely focused on the sustainability angle, and there's just a wonderful community. And so just gotten to know a lot of great people. So when doing that outreach, you know, we turn to our friends, but like I said earlier, this wasn't a popularity contest. This was, where's the best stories? That's what we wanted to share with the industry to make the biggest impact possible.
Okay. Okay, great.
So, all right, well, let's no further ado, let's jump over to Ecuador.
How can we transform because of the pandemic? Where is tourism going? Where do we need to go? And how can we adjust our current model?
We're developing all these new products within, I would say, transformational travel to help families and people to digest what they went through.
We don't exactly know where this is going to, but work towards what the people are going to need after this lockdown. It's a program that's called 25 Seconds, and the purpose of one's relationship with nature and with Earth.
And the name of 25 seconds comes from the concept that if you found planet Earth existence on a 24-hour span, humans has been in the planet for 25 seconds. When we're talking about let's save the planet, it's like the planet has been here with us, you know, learn to do things different to preserve our society, our species. I can guarantee you that we will survive. I don't know how we will change, but we will survive.
It's an opportunity to live the transformational philosophy. It's a time for feeling emotions, placing them and listening to them. So we have to look at our community and our environment, and to promote healthy emotional ways of sustaining each other.
Thank you again, Rob. And we'll try to get you to stop share.
Oh, whoops, my bad.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, sorry. So sorry about that. My control has been lost there for a while, but very, very good story. And you know, once again, talking about sort of the different impacts that that sort of passion and commitment that you've been speaking about throughout can bring about. What about the storytelling? A lot of this is meeting the right people, making the right connections. Looking for that resiliency, that self-sufficiency, that, sustainability within our industry. But how does GLP go about actually telling these stories? And, why is storytelling so important not just for a tourism business, but for a tourism business that maybe wants to also tell their sustainability story?
Well, I have to at least give a call back to how I got into this. And you mentioned it earlier, you know, for years I was a photographer, travel photographer, and I got into, just to give you some elements, because I think when you put them all together, you'll see my lens and our lens on tourism and storytelling. But from the photography standpoint, I'd be doing, you know, this is going back a little ways, but slideshows. And, you know, when photo was not on a phone and not digital, it was slide film, which, you know, was brutal. But I think my point is I was doing shows around the US market in different East Coast, West Coast, and I got two comments back from people. One, they love the imagery, but two, they love the stories. And that's really when it started for me, when hearing that it's not just about the imagery, it's also about the context of what the image is all about. I then got into documentary films, and when I lived in Seattle, I used to go to the local, very famous, very well known in the US film festival, and it was all documentary films. Again, that authentic style of storytelling. And then you pull in, to round it up, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. For those history buffs, you know, that was climate change. That was the very, you know, 2006. This is going way back. And that, when I saw that, that's when I saw the power of video. You know, if he can create at that time the most successful documentary film of all time, basically as a PowerPoint, you saw that the power of video. And then essentially that's where GLP came from. But, you know, I think also with the TourismStrong series, storytelling plays such an important role. And that's ultimately what we selected, were the best stories. And in this market now, I mean, all businesses, public, you know, if it's a public sector, private sector, we have to build back trust. We have to build back trust in our destination and you know, what we're selling, what we're offering. It's a very different market now. You know, safety is very important. Now, nature, the outdoors, health and wellness, you know, areas that were sort of these niche areas are now suddenly thrust to the forefront. And so in all of that, you know, I think it ultimately comes down to how do you communicate where tourism is and or where your product is, where your brand is going. And storytelling is just a really great vehicle and tool to do that.
What are some of the key factors that people need to take into consideration in order to tell an effective story?
Well, I'm going to go into that on some of the. Do you want me to pull up those slides on power of story?
Probably, I'm just conscious of time also, so it's probably a good chance to go into that right now and maybe see some of those exact areas.
Yeah. Now let me just pull this up because this will round off what we're doing here. And okay, so the power of storytelling. You know, again, we just were talking, I was saying my journey and my path on the power of content, but at the end of the day too, I will say, when you look at content, digital content, it's not just about video. It also can be photo, can be text. Stories come in all different shapes and sizes, especially now with social media. But quickly, just to go through these, just to give people a sense and just being conscious of time. What kind of stories should you tell? I mean, definitely from our standpoint, you know, I talked about the documentary, authentic. Why do people like certain films? They're engaging. You know, they're not selling a product per se. They're not promotional. You know, in our stories and in the story you saw on Bantalay Nook in Thailand, that's a character-driven story. Bang Hem. The story follows his journey and you get connected with him and audiences will engage. But it doesn't mean you just have to have one character. You could have a multiple of characters, and we've done that. It really just comes down to who are the best people to help communicate that story. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, just the experiential aspect of a story. You know, now people are looking for rich, and this is very timely. People want a rich, immersive experience when they go travel. And the outdoors, nature, you know, health and wellness are becoming popular sectors within tourism, and that experience that people can take away. is really important. So feel free, Graham, just to interrupt me on this, but I'll just keep going just for time's sake. But, and then here are sort of the 4 building blocks of what does make a great story. And there's lots of variables. I mean, I could show 10 different variables, but I think first and foremost, I'll call out the 4 biggest ones that we see. And obviously this is very timely after hearing the Ecuador story. What's the purpose? You know, what's the goal of what are you trying to accomplish in telling your new story about your destination, about your brand? That purpose is going to carry through. It unifies your team. It brings everyone together on one sole purpose or a series of goals. So then you're on the same page. And that, when we produce a story, is the most challenging part, because it requires unity and everyone coming to on the same page. And sometimes that doesn't always happen. The story arc, this is really getting into what makes a great story that great. And it's the journey you take people on, you know, and they call it the arc. You know, you sort of start at the bottom, it goes up, you have a conflict, a drama, and then possibly something is resolved, or maybe it's not, you know, so taking people on that emotional, I like to say that emotional journey. The other, which I mentioned earlier, you know, who are the voices of your story? Could be a single character, like I said, or a group of people. And then lastly, the location. There's nothing better than a really good backdrop. Obviously, you know, if it's a food market or if it's beautiful landscapes, you know, these are obviously all important things to consider. And then,
sorry, Rob, just to go back, if you wouldn't mind going back to that last slide, because I just want to actually go back to more towards the beginning of our discussion, where you were talking about we're all startups again. And, you know, when you're at that startup mode, when you're at that area where, you know, you need to be rethinking your business and everything, I think number one, the purpose is really, really important. And I just think that, you know, this idea of, you know, telling a great story also fits into that idea of, you know, being a startup again, rethinking your business. And what is your purpose? What is the story that you really want to be able to tell?
And why you started your company. I mean, that's really getting to the passion part. So yeah, I agree. The purpose is crucial.
Yeah.
And then lastly, this is more, you know, you create that great content just to give you a sense of some of the building blocks and some of the elements of storytelling. You have to look at how the content's going to get out into the market. I won't read all of this, but basically, if you look on the left-hand side, you've got paid content, which again, they're positives, they're pro and con, positives and challenges to it. You know, you have your owned content, which is your website, your own resources internally, but you have limited distribution. And then the shared content you have, which is again, really tapping into the social marketplace now, social media. And then lastly, what we focus on at GLP is earned, and that's getting media pickup. Because again, from our standpoint, we're going to produce a really great story that's going to get interest by the media, by consumers, etc. Yeah. So, but do you want me, Graham, just to jump into the last story?
Well, I think the last story is good, because all of this and, you know, the telling of the story is very much about inspiration, and we need the inspirational stories, especially right now. We need these inspirational stories to keep our purpose strong, you know, to keep our tourism strong. So with that, if you could give the introduction to this story and let us know a little bit about it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is the final story I'll share today, and this takes place in New York City, in New York, in the eastern U.S. And as many of you know, New York City was the epicenter for COVID-19 for a long time. Pierre is a chef. He's originally from Senegal, and actually we did a lot of filming with him in Senegal years ago. Again, looking at his origins, his roots, coming from Western Africa, and just the wonderful history he has, and the flavor of food he brought to New York, into Manhattan and New York City. So the story here really is about food, but it's more importantly when looking at TourismStrong and his role, the role he felt he needed to play in reaching out to you know, the helpers and the medical community in New York City when the pandemic hit. So I'll let it speak for itself.
My name is Pierre Chiam. I'm the co-founder and executive chef of Teranga Restaurant in New York City, as well as the owner of Yolele Foods.
Tell us that moment when the pandemic hit New York City. What was it like? How did it impact you and your immediate family?
My fiance Lisa is expecting, so we got really scared because hospitals are getting overwhelmed. So that was a challenge. So that was really, really scary for the business, for the restaurant. You know, obviously, we had to reinvent ourselves. We were able to, after 1 week, turn the restaurant into a delivery-only restaurant. We also focused on serving the hospital industry, because we have 2 major hospitals in our community. So that was one thing we could do, is started to just deliver to nurses and first responders at hospitals. And we had the community supporting us to doing that. So we started a GoFundMe campaign, and people could even buy food for those hospital workers, which was really great. The reaction and the response was really inspiring.
I mean, their lives have been transformed because of this. And this was a way that you guys could help. What was that like, serving them, taking care of them?
It was awesome. It was like we felt like we were part of the solution. Nurses and doctors are really the ones we're all hoping for them to get us back to normal, and so being able to feed them, which is the first need, vital need, was just very inspiring to us and kept us going actually. So people send pictures because they have just experienced this cuisine for the first time, and they're like so proud, and they're repeat customers. So that's really impactful to us. We are a service industry, so we have to be where people want us to be. I think the ones who will survive are the ones who can adjust, you know, and that's what's going to be the case.
Was making me a little bit hungry. I'm looking forward to breakfast now. Rob, listen, we're getting towards the end, but I just want to, first of all, kind of go over again some of the key points that you have brought up. And the one that, you know, really stood out was we're all startups again. We're all in this together, and that it really comes down to community. And that very much it's that ability to communicate and collaborate that is going to make tourism strong, to be able to forge those partnerships. And you've been able to get a lot of insights into sustainability in tourism from these experiences. And, you know, that's come out in the article that you did publish. We had one other question that came through, and it was, how does GLP monitor or evaluate the sustainability of these projects? Now, I don't think that actually GLP, you're actually directly monitoring them, because they're actually not your projects. You're trying to tell the story. But maybe I can adjust this question. In choosing the sustainability stories to tell, how do you evaluate which ones are going to stand out and which ones fit for you or which ones don't?
Well, our goal at the end of the day, I'll take a step back, and this is a great question, and it's actually something we're very conscious of, because, and I actually brought this up in another webinar I had today, you know, if you want to say, we're a marketing entity, you know, we produce content and we market it and we promote it, but we go very back into the roots and the stories that we produce, and what we produced in Thailand, what we produced in Chile, what we produced in you know, places all around the world. You know, there's a very specific, again, getting into our mission, you know, people come to us, brands, organizations, they want to work with us because they see our track record and experience in sustainable tourism and telling really good stories.
Yeah.
So our mission carries through, and we push it throughout the entire campaign, because ultimately, if we're working with great local partners that are doing really good work on the ground, we produce great content, it helps market a destination, a brand. That traffic is then going to ultimately find its way to at least the sector of that destination. And that's really the goal. Like, so use the example of Bantale Nook in Southern Thailand. You know, we're marketing ultimately to community-based tourism in Thailand. You know, yes, to that one village in that community, but more importantly, I mean, the strategy here is to drive this sector of travel and tourism to getting people to look at. I mean, that video is very powerful. It shows, like, wow, to be immersed in a local community and to have that local authentic experience. You're sitting on the beach having local food, you're making crafts and batiks and all that. So not to go too long on the answer, but you know, we carry it through, like, beginning to end. And the person's question about how do we monitor, I mean, we're looking at that. I mean, we're committed to that. We want to make an impact on it because our name is tied to this work, and we're promoting it, marketing it. So we're sort of part of the fabric, and ultimately we want to make a big impact, and our partners see that too.
Wonderful. Well, Rob, I have to thank you very, very much for taking the time to, number one, share your insights, share your stories, the videos, and very much giving that inspiration of what all of us within the tourism industry are actually able to do. Now, for those participating, Rob and I have been talking more about workshops, more knowledge sessions on how to be able to tell stories more effectively. And we hope over the coming months, we'll be able to reach out and provide more information about that. So please do stay tuned. I also do want to just finish by being able to give the contact information for those that want to get in touch with GLP Films or want to get in touch with PATA, so that you can carry on and find out more. So please, just one moment. Here is the contact information for GLP Films at email info@glpfilms.com or their website, www.glpfilms.com. And at the bottom is the web link to the article that Rob published on sustainability and some of the insights that he has gained just from his work with TourismStrong and also just the overall COVID experience. As always, we have the email at pata.org and our website, www.pata.org. Rob, once again, sincere appreciation and thanks for joining us today. It was an insightful conversation and we got a lot out of it. And also a big thank you to all of our participants. We greatly appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.